Neither one's
Está como
going.
ahí.
Let's see. In 2003,
Yeah.
I was living in Montevideo trying to build a model view controller web application framework. In 2003, Uruguay and Argentina was really fucking cheap because it was just after the crisis, and and I'd been in San Francisco and Boston doing startup stuff, and was trying to build a model view controller, object relational mapper type framework in Perl, and it didn't work. So Ruby on Rails came out. I'm like, oh, this is awesome. And so I switched to doing Ruby on Rails, and I was like, I don't know, the 5th person who started developing stuff on Ruby on Rails. And so I was traveling around. I spent a while living in Rome, doing contracting, and then went back to San Francisco and was looking for some contract work. And this guy, Noah Glass, wanted to do a podcasting startup, and he'd gone to 37 Signals, this, 37 Signals.
Yeah.
So they had done these workshops on how to do a startup and how to do a business and everything else, and they said, look, we've got this new thing, Ruby on Rails. And everybody's like, you're crazy. No one wants to do Ruby on Rails. That's insane. Too much magic. And I was the only one in San Francisco, and the only one in the San Francisco Bay Area who was like, Ruby on Rails is awesome. And because everyone else thought it was crazy. And so I started working with this guy, Noah Glass, who's the original founder. He had this idea of doing a podcasting thing. His next door neighbor, like in San Francisco, you have back porches where the fire escapes are. And so across the porch from him, across the way, was Evan Williams, who had just sold his company to Blogger, to Google.
Yeah.
And so Noah kept going out every morning with coffee and kept asking for an investment from Ev to invest in it. And eventually he got an investment, and he got a couple, I don't know, $40,000 or something. And so Noah and I started working on this podcasting thing, and then he hired a couple other people. Ray McClure is a Flash developer, and Gaba, who's my wife, and also from Uruguay. And so we just sort of started working at first in cafes, and then in his living room, and then Ev moved to a bigger apartment, so we moved to his old apartment and worked out of there for a while, and built out the podcasting. It was very sort of stealthy. We don't want anyone to know about it. It was really secret and everything else. And then Chris Anderson, the guy from TED, he got a hold of Evan Williams and said, Ev, what are you doing? And Ev's like, didn't want to say cooking classes. Because he was, not doing anything, and he really wanted an invitation back to TED. And the only way you get, even if you're going to pay the $6,000, the only way you get an invitation is if they think you're doing something interesting. So he said, oh, I'm doing this podcasting startup, which he'd been investing in. And so the TED people were like, oh, podcasting is cool. And so the team grew a little bit, and we launched it at TED and did a New York Times article at the same time, And it grew, and it was sort of successful, but we had this problem that because it was sort of seen and marketed as Evan Williams' second, like his next thing after Blogger, he was completely paranoid that it would fuck up. And so we waited and waited and waited and waited and made it more and more and more perfect. And we waited so long that Apple launched podcasting integration into iTunes.
That's what happened.
After we had gone down and met with Apple to try and negotiate a business development deal and shown them everything we were doing. Be careful about negotiating shit with Apple.
Yeah. I heard stories.
And
I've heard this story before.
And so basically we spent another year working on it, and it didn't work. Like everybody loved the site, the press loved the site, the design was awesome. We got
How much investment to that point?
So up until the launch, we had a $200,000 investment from just Evan Williams, just one person. And then leading up to the launch, we were going to do an $800,000 seed round, and about 3/4 of the way through closing the $800,000 seed round, Charles River Ventures, which is a VC from Boston, showed up and said, no, you shouldn't do a seed round, you should do a proper Series A round. And so they put another $4 million into it. So the first round was a $200,000 seed round, and then a $5 million round. $1 million from angels and $4 million from this one VC. And so they put that money in, which in 2005 was a lot of money. Like there was not seed investing, there was not Series A investing. This was the same year that Flickr got bought for $34 million. And everybody thought $34 million was a huge amount of money. And for creating what was the dominant Web 2.0 site. 10 years later, Instagram has the same number of people and same length of time, and it's $1 billion. But so that was going on, and we just weren't getting user numbers. We weren't getting activity and everything else. And essentially, the problem was people went from about half the team had worked at Google or down in Silicon Valley, and everyone lived in San Francisco. Like everyone lived in the Mission in San Francisco. And when they worked in Silicon Valley, they had an hour commute each direction. And so the reason they were interested in podcasting was because they had an hour commute each direction, where they were really bored of driving or riding on the company bus, and so they would listen to podcasts. So what do? We have an office where we don't have a commute. Everybody walks to work. No one listens to podcasts anymore. So we weren't even using our own product anymore.
That's right.
And that's the death knell.
Yeah.
You stop being able to understand and fix stuff. And so there was this idea of, let's do something else. And we started throwing around different ideas. What if we reinvented, email lists? And what if we, do all sorts of things? What crazy ideas have you had in the past? What if we make a blog reader that merges in the blog posts with your email? We started looking at what applications we'd worked on in the past and what applications we liked in the past. And everybody started throwing out ideas. And one of the projects that I'd worked on was this thing called TextMob, which was a text-based text message-based, SMS-based social network for coordinating protests and piquetes and blockades and things like that. And it had been used starting in 2004 and 2005 for protests within the United States, including occupations of buildings and large protests and everything else. And so myself and another developer, Blaine, had built the SMS delivery system for TextMob. And we spent a lot of time playing with Asterisk. So we thought, Asterisk is fun, you can hack with it, and it's really ugly and messy, and text messages are fun and everything else. And so we had everybody in the company sign up for TextMob, and people applied, and they're like, some work, some don't, and everything else. And then people started throwing out other ideas of, I with this university system, we had these, have you heard of, this will tell you who's really geeky, .plan files and the finger command on Unix.
Not that far.
One of the guys had gone to a university where they'd actually built software on top of that, so you get a history of the changes of your .plan files. So you could, instead of just fingering, you just get the current one. You get the history of, and people at the campus had used it as like a status update history. And they even converted it into a web version of that. And so, at some point, people said, this isn't going to work, and someone said, well, why don't we just, before we fire everyone and close the office, why don't we just start doing hackathons and build something new? And so, starting in January 2006, there was every Wednesday was a hackathon.
Go on, come on. Go on. Please.
So every Wednesday we did a hackathon where you had to get a different group of people. So you weren't allowed, interdisciplinary teams, so you weren't allowed to work with your best friend in the company, and you weren't allowed to work with someone who did the same kind of work as you. So front-end developers, database people, product people, the teams had to change every single time. And we had just a series of sort of brainstorming sessions, and people would throw out ideas. And they'd start building it at 9 a.m. and do a demo at 6 p.m. And over the course of about 2 months of attempting to build solutions and tools in that space of what is mobile, what is telephony, what is